Alright, so now you've got Android Studio installed and set up, we're going to dive right in and create our first Android project. Once we've done that, we'll take a few minutes to familiarize ourselves with the Android Studio interface, and we'll run our default project on an Android phone simulator right here in our computer as well. So lots to cover, let's get started. When you launch Android Studio, you'll see a menu much like this, which is pretty straightforward. We're going to be selecting the top option, Start a New Android Studio Project. So click that one, and then you'll see a page like this with just a few settings for your new project or app. So I'm going to call the application Demo App. I suggest you do the same. If you've not used Android Studio before, your company domain will probably be blank, or you may have a suggested one in there. So I've got robpercival.example.com here. It really doesn't matter too much what your company domain is at this point. I would recommend going for either your name or your company name, if you've got one, .com. And the only real importance of the company domain here is that the package name will be created from that company domain. So you can see it's created the package name as com.robpercival.demoapp. So it's just the company domain in reverse, and then the application name with any spaces or capitals or strange characters removed. The package name is used if you're submitting your app to Google Play. It's a unique way of referencing your app, so it has to be completely unique. But you can change it at any time, so if you do discover that someone else has already used a package name that you've created, you can change it later on. So don't worry too much about this. And then finally, we've got the project location. So you can see it's put the app for me in the default location, Android Studio Projects. I'm just going to leave it there, but if you want to change it, then you can put it in any folder you like, just by clicking the three dots there. Okay, so far so good. Click Next. Now we have a fairly big decision to make, the minimum SDK that our app will support. Now you can see we've got all the various options right up to Android 7 there, and we can choose any one of those. But if you choose Android 7, then your app will only be able to be run on phones running Android 7, which is, as you can see, at the time of recording, not that many. You will, however, be able to use all specific features for Android 7. So my advice while we're making basic projects is to stick with the default, so API 15, Ice Cream Sandwich, which will run on 97.4% of devices, and will likely include the vast majority of features that you'll need for your app. So we'll choose this one by default, and we'll just switch to different versions of the API as and when we're using those specific features. Feel free to use a different version if you want though. Down here we can choose to support other Android platforms. We'll be looking at Wear later on, but we won't be looking at TV, Auto or Glass in this course. So let's click Next to continue. And now we're given the option to add an activity to our app. Now an activity on Android is essentially a screen. And you can see there are several different activities that we can add if we want to. So we've got a basic activity there with just a back button, a menu and a plus. And then we've got an empty activity, which is selected by default, and then some various other ones, which we'll be looking at later on in the course, which are all fairly self-explanatory. We'll start with the empty activity. So select that one and click Next. And then we can, if we want to, customize the name of that activity. But the default name, main activity, is one that you'll see over and over again when developing for Android. So we'll leave that as the default. Okay. Finally, we've got through all of the settings, so just click Finish, and it'll take a few moments, but Android will then create your project. And here we go. You'll be presented with a tip of the day. If you haven't already turned those off, feel free to leave those on. They're often quite useful, but I'll just switch that off and close that window. And this then is the main Android Studio window, and this is where we'll be working for the majority of this course. Looks pretty empty at the moment, so let's bring in our project by clicking number 1, project at the top left there. So here you can see we've got two options to choose from. The first is our app, and you can see by the little folder symbol that this is the selection of folders and files that make up our app. The second is Gradle scripts. Now Gradle is an open source build tool, which essentially is what Android Studio uses to build your app from these folders and files. If we want to, we can add in some scripts to do some custom work in the build process. We'll be doing that later on in the course, but we don't need to do anything with Gradle scripts right now. For now though, we'll look into the app folder by clicking the triangle, and you can see we've got 3 folders within that. So the first is manifests, and in the manifests file we've got a single file which is Android manifest.xml. If we have a quick look at that, we don't need to worry too much about the code. All we need at this point is to know that the Android manifest contains some basic details about our app, such as the icon, label, so the app name there, the app theme, etc. We'll be editing this later on, but for now, we'll just leave it as the default. At the bottom there, we've got our res folder, short for resources. And this is where we'll be putting things like icons, images that we'll use in our app, or music that our app needs. Finally then, the middle folder, Java, is where the real meat of our app lies. And specifically, we're going to ignore the 2 test folders for the moment. And in that first folder, com.robpercival.demo app, we'll click on main activity. And this is the main file where code for our app is run. So this is your first taste of Java, and it looks quite scary, but don't worry, it'll be second nature in just a few videos time. We'll have a quick summary of what's going on here. Essentially, we're defining the package, which is just com.robpercival.demo app. Then if we click on the 3 dots here, you can see we're importing 2 classes, or essentially bundles of code that will allow our app to work. We'll be importing many more classes later on in the course, but for now we've just got the default 2. The first is app compat activity. Compat is short for compatibility, and essentially this makes sure that our app is backwardly compatible with as many older versions of Android as possible. And then we've just got the operating system bundle, which allows us to work with the Android operating system. And then finally here, we're creating a class called main activity, which will allow us to work with the activity that we created. So remember, the screen will display to users. Now, I'm not going to go into this code in more detail right now, but we will be covering it extensively later on, so don't worry about that. For now, though, we're going to go back to res and look in the layout folder, and you should see activity_main.xml. So double click on that, and this is where we'll see what our app actually looks like. And there it is. It looks slightly horrendously complicated, but again, don't worry, we'll break it down in no time at all. So this XML file is what defines the layout and the look of our activity, or the screen that we present to users. So obviously in the middle, we've got our phone, and we get a preview there of what our app looks like. On the left-hand side of this window, we've got various user interface elements that we can drag into our app. So we've got some layouts. You get a guide from the little icon as to what they might do. And we'll be looking at all of these layouts later on in the course. And then we've got what are known as widgets. So things like text views to allow us to display text, buttons, radio buttons, checkboxes, switches. You get the idea. Progress bars. Then underneath that, we've got text fields, which we can use to get the user to enter some information. We've got containers for things like lists or videos. And then we've got various date and time features, so a date picker and a clock. And then we've got some advanced user interface elements like zoom controls. We'll be looking at some of these later on. And some custom widgets as well if we want to build a completely customized user interface. So we'll be looking at those in more detail later on. But for now, let's just run on and look at this top bar here. So we can quite easily switch to different devices. So if I wanted to have a more tablet-sized device, I could switch to a Nexus 10, and this would give me a preview of what my app would look like on a tablet. And I can also switch to portrait and landscape mode very easily. I can even change the app theme right there. You can see there's many different themes to choose from. I'm going to leave it as the default for now. I can switch activities if I want to. At the moment I've only got the one, so I'll just leave it as that. If we've introduced translations, then we can edit those using the world symbol, and we can also change the version of Android that we're previewing with as well. So there's a lot we can do just from this screen. And then we've got some zoom options. We can refresh, and there's some more settings hidden behind the cogwheel there as well. Now we're almost done with our preview. Just need to look at the component tree up here on the top right. This is a way of looking at all the different elements that make up your activity or your screen for the user. So at the top level, we've got the device screen itself. And then within that, we've got a relative layout, which essentially means that everything is laid out relative to what's around it. So if I was to add a second text view beneath the tiny Hello World one there, it would be displayed relative to the first one. We'll see how that works in more detail in the next video. But our final user interface element there is the text view itself, which if I zoom in enough, you can see says Hello World. And finally then at the bottom, we've got properties, which will vary depending on what element you've got selected at any given time, and has a huge range of properties that we can use to customize each individual element. Again, we'll look at those in much more detail when we look at the specific user interface element types in this section. But that's essentially it. We've met the two main files that we're going to be working with. That is the mainActivity.xml file, which controls the layout, and the mainActivity Java file, which controls what the app actually does. Later on, we'll also be looking at editing the manifest and the Gradle scripts, but for now, those two files are really the ones you should be concentrating on. All right, so our final thing then for this video is to actually see our demo app in action, and we do that by clicking the green play button at the top there. And this will allow us to run our app either on an emulator within our computer or on an Android device attached to our computer by USB. So we're going to go for the emulator here, and I haven't set up any yet, so I'm going to click Create New Emulator. And now you can choose between a huge range of different devices. That's a list of phones. We can choose tablets and Wear and TV devices as well. I'm going to go for the Nexus S, simply because the resolution works out well for my screen. But you can choose any one of these devices. It really doesn't matter. Then click Next. And then we can choose which version of Android our device will run. You can see we've got a range of options here, from Gingerbread to Marshmallow. You'll notice that some of them have got an _64 at the end. This is because they're 64-bit. None of our projects particularly use 64-bit architecture, so it doesn't matter which one you choose, but I would recommend choosing one with Google APIs built in. This will make things like integrating Google Maps and Google Play much more straightforward. Unfortunately, at the time of recording this video, there isn't a version of Nugget with Google APIs built in, so I'm going to stick with the recommended option of API level 22, and again, we'll switch to a different version as and when we need to. But you can choose whichever version you like. I would recommend one with Google APIs. And then we'll click Next, and you can change again the device name, the Android version, and the scale default orientation. You can bring in some hardware optimization on the emulated performance if you want, but I'd leave that as automatic. The device frame is just that little bit of a phone, like what we saw earlier on in the app preview. I think that looks quite nice, so I'm going to leave it there, but you can disable it if you want to. Okay, so then click Finish, and that will then create your AVD or Android Virtual Device, and I would use the same selection for future launches. Just makes it a little bit quicker, saves you having to select it every time, and then click OK. And this will then launch your AVD and run your app within it. It will probably take about half a minute or so, depending on your machine. One advantage of Android Studio 2 over the previous version is that the emulators do run a lot faster. And here we are. Here's my device. So it's currently launching. You can see we've got a nice set of options down the right here. We can change the orientation. We can take a screenshot, we can change the volume, and we can press the default Android buttons there as well if we want to. But there we go. You hopefully saw the Android home screen there. But here is our app. Takes a little while to readjust to the orientation change. Let's put it back up the right way. And there we go. So congratulations, you've run your first Android app in the emulator. And it does indeed look reasonably like was predicted in the preview that we saw down there. One final thing to notice is that down at the bottom here, we've got loads and loads of logs or information about things that have happened with our app. This is a very useful area to be getting into when we start building apps and looking for errors or making sure that our apps are running as we think they are. But for now, really, it just tells us that our app is up and running. So there we go. That's your whirlwind introduction to Android Studio. Hopefully you now feel reasonably comfortable with how the software works, and in particular the relationship between these two core files, the XML layout file and the main activity Java code. In the next few videos, we'll be focusing on the app layout, and we'll be adding some different widgets to our apps and then customizing them, starting with the text view in the next video. See you there.